So we begin with the Parsha in a nutshell, as we do. The problem is that we need introduction to the Parsha in a nutshell because the story picks up exactly in the middle of the story, not exactly, but in the middle of the story at the point of great drama. Long story short, last week, Miketz, we read how Joseph rose to power. He becomes the second in command of Egypt. He becomes the leader of Egypt. And the brothers have to come. Everyone has to come to purchase food, including the brothers. And Joseph accuses them of being spies. Long story short, he says you have to come back with Benjamin. The father doesn't want to send Benjamin. Eventually, he sends Benjamin. Joseph then plants his goblet in Benjamin's bag. And now they find the goblet in Benjamin's bag. So Joseph says, okay, Benjamin is going to be the one who will stay here in Egypt with me as a slave, and everybody go back to your father in peace. And that's where the last week's portion leaves off. And now we jump to this week's portion. So we'll read a nutshell. All right, I think you can see it. So the nutshell reads as follows. Judah approaches Joseph to plead for the release of Benjamin, offering himself as a slave to the Egyptian ruler in Benjamin's stead. Upon witnessing his brother's loyalty to one another, okay, that line is commentary. We're not sure what triggered it, but whatever the case is, Joseph reveals his identity to them. I am Joseph, he declares. Is my father still alive? That's the sentence he says. Direct quote, the sentence he says when he reveals his identity. He says, I am Joseph, is my father still alive? The brothers are overcome by shame and remorse, but Joseph comforts them. It was not you who sent me here, he says to them, but God. It has all been ordained from above to save us and the entire region from famine. The brothers rush back to Canaan with the news. Jacob comes to Egypt with his sons and their families, 70 souls in all, and is reunited with his beloved son after 22 years. On his way to Egypt, he receives a divine promise. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for I will be there, for I will there make you a great nation. I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. Joseph gathers the wealth of Egypt by selling food and seed during the famine. Pharaoh gives Jacob's family the fertile country of Goshen to settle, and the children of Israel prosper in their Egyptian exile. So that's the story in short. So it seems like it's pretty optimistic. Of course, we know the end of the story. So we know that there's trouble on the horizon, but the trouble does not begin, at least overtly, until the book of Exodus. But so far, they move to Egypt, they reunite, and it seems everything seems wonderful and beautiful. So that's the story in short. That's the nutshell. Now the question is, what do we do? What's happening here? So the first thing we want to think about is the big question. We have to think about the big questions before we think about the details. What are the big questions? The big questions are, what was Joseph's plan? In other words, Joseph has been harassing his brothers, for lack of a better word, tormenting his brothers for many months. If you think about from the first time they come down to Egypt, and then they have to go back to their father, and then they run out of provisions, they have to come back. So this is a story of months, and he's basically tormenting them, accusing them of spies. When they go back, he still has Shimon with him in Egypt, and he certainly gives them a hard time. So you could say, well, is he trying to punish them? Okay, I don't know. But it seems that from the moment when he reveals his identity, he is obviously very kind to them, and the epitome of I guess, forgiveness is the right word, even though we can talk about that, whether or not it's forgiveness. But he is very kind to them, doesn't mention anything of the negativity, and just is just the beloved brother. The question, of course, becomes, what's the purpose and what was Joseph's intention in giving them a difficult time up to this point? Especially if you consider that it wasn't just the brothers that Joseph was affecting negatively or harming, but it was also the father, because all this time the father was in pain because he was afraid that Benjamin would be taken away. And it was a terrible pain for the father. In addition to the question, it's even a greater question: why did Joseph wait so long before telling his father that he is alive? So Joseph at this point is, by the time Joseph reveals his identity, he is already a king of Egypt for 9 years, because there were 7 years of plenty, and then there were 2 years of famine. We know that when Joseph tells his father, come down, he says, there's another 5 years left to the famine. 2 years have passed, there's another 5 years. So it's a total of 9 years that Joseph is the most powerful person in the ancient world. He certainly could have sent a text message or an email to his father saying, I'm alive. He doesn't do so. That's a question.
Rabbi, I think you told us the answer in the past years. One is,
What did I say?
I think you said that Joseph wanted to see what the difference was in his brothers. And if they had, that was one thing. And clearly Judah was the one who showed that they had turned around completely. He was willing to sacrifice himself under those circumstances, similar to what happened to him.
Yes. Yes.
So
Okay.
that was number one. Number two, why he did not send news back to his father. He didn't want his father to lose all his other children. He did not want to draw a wedge between Jacob and the others, which this would have started a family feud that would have resulted in no tribes at all.
Yes. Okay. So
I think you said this, Rabbi.
No, you're right. No, you're saying a point. I just want to highlight a few points that you're saying. I'm just going to elaborate a little bit. Let's think about from the brother's perspective for a moment. Okay, so Jill's point is as follows. Jill's point is that Joseph does not want to torment his brothers. What Joseph is trying to do is Joseph wants to help his brothers transform or repent, or at least wants to test, either test or help, depending on your perspective. What does it mean? How do you repent for the fact that you sell your brother as a slave? I mean, I guess that's falling pretty low. How do you repent for that? How do you transform? How do you know that you transformed? So Maimonides gives a test in general. Maimonides says, if you want to know if a person has been completely transformed, in other words, what he calls true teshuvah, true repentance, how do I know if I've been truly transformed? He says as follows: the only test is if the same scenario represents itself, the same scenario of sin represents itself. The temptation to sin is just as powerful. The urge to sin is just as powerful. And yet, at the second time around, I make the right choice and not the wrong choice. That's the test. As opposed to somebody, I did something wrong and I regret it. But the fact that I regret it, the fact that I regret it does not mean that I have any. The fact that I regret it doesn't mean that if I've be put in that same situation again, I would not succumb. And also, in other words, if let's say I don't have the opportunity to sin, right now, when I was young, I was passionate. Now I lose energy. I'm old. I'm on my deathbed. I'm not running to rob a bank right now. Okay, so that is teshuvah. We discussed that, but it's not complete teshuvah. Complete teshuvah is when then the opportunity is there for sin, the incentive is there for sin, the passion is there for sin, and there's transformation. So to elaborate on what Jill says, Joseph is recreating the exact same scenario that was present when he was sold as a slave. What was at the heart of this problem in the family of Jacob in the 12 tribes? What was at the heart of the problem? The heart of the problem is that the children could not come to terms with the fact that the father has a favorite son, number one, and that the favorite son is the son of his beloved wife, Rachel, who has passed away, who's deceased, and as opposed to a son of their mother, Leah, the first wife he married, not the beloved wife. We don't want to go back into that entire story. So in other words, it's not fair. They don't accept that the father should or could honor or love one child more than anybody else, specifically Rachel's children over Leah's children, because now you have a double layer of tension. It's a tension between the competition between between the brothers, that one is being honored and loved more than others. And it's also going back a generation to their mothers, because there's a tension between Leah and Rachel. So here they get rid of Joseph. Why? Because the father loves him. It's not because of the dreams. It's because the father loves him. And the father loves him more than the other brothers. And especially because of the fact he's the son of Rachel. So what do we need to do to recreate the scenario? Very simple. You have to show that you have to set up a situation where Jacob's love for Rachel's son Benjamin he favors. In other words, Jacob didn't change in the story. I don't know who changed. Let's think who didn't change. Jacob did not change in the story. Jacob didn't learn anything. Jacob continues to favor one brother over the other brothers, and specifically, he continues to favor Benjamin, the son of Rachel. So Jacob has not transformed. He has not changed. I'm not getting into why or what. He did not change. That's clear. Now, the entire story highlights that the brothers could have been offended. What happened in the previous story? The brothers come to the father and say, we have to go back, buy more provisions. What does the father say? I don't care if we all starve. Benjamin is not going anywhere. Okay, and they have to debate with him, and only over time, when they run out of food or they're close to running out of food, does Jacob actually allow Benjamin to go out? Only after Judah promises that he's going to protect Benjamin. Why does he care about Benjamin more than the other brothers? Shouldn't that be offensive to the brothers? Just like the fact that he favored Joseph was so offensive to them. So what's happening here is again and again and again, even in Judah's speech, what we have in this week's parsha, Judah keeps saying that my father is especially connected to Benjamin. Okay, so what should that do? How should I react if my father is especially connected to Benjamin? I know what we did last time when the father favored a child of Rachel. We got rid of him actively. In this scenario, we don't even have to do anything. All we have to do is go back to our father and say the truth. What's the truth? Benjamin was taken prisoner, was taken as a slave because he was framed that he stole a cup of the king's goblets. And now they're going to do exactly and that would achieve the same goal that has been achieved when they tried to get rid of Joseph. Yet here, what happens? Not only are they not offended by the father favoring Benjamin, not only does that pain not translate into hate toward Benjamin, but Judah now is willing to sacrifice his own freedom for Benjamin, doing what? That's just confirming the father's favoritism to Benjamin, and Judah accepts it. That's a complete transformation, and that's what Joseph is waiting for. Joseph is waiting to see that they transform, that they would not commit the same sin again, even though the temptation is there, the incentive is there. Here we get a chance to get rid of the favorite child who's the son of Rachel. We can get rid of him easily this time. And yet they don't do that. Okay, that's ultimate transformation. That's ultimate transformation. That's ultimate teshuvah. So the best thing Joseph can do for his brothers is give them an opportunity to do teshuvah, to repent. And then we get to the second question, which I mentioned here, but Jill reminded me that I say this every year, so I apologize. I'll say it in under 60 seconds. Why couldn't Joseph send a telegram to his father? There was no emails then, but I'm sure there were telegrams. Why couldn't Joseph send his father a telegram that he's alive? The answer is like this. If he would impose himself back into this family without telling them, without testing that the brothers have been transformed. So of course they're going to say, yes, we love you, Joseph, because they have no choice, because he's the monarch. He's the monarch of the superpower. But did he really heal? Did this family actually heal? There would be no way of knowing. And that's why what Joseph does is much, much more clever. Joseph says, I can't come in and say that I am your brother prematurely, because maybe I'm going to reunite physically, but I'm not reuniting spiritually. In other words, I don't necessarily know that this entire family has been reunited. I don't understand that you accept me in the same way. So I'm not going to insert myself back into this family if the brotherhood has not been restored. Now that the brotherhood is restored, once it's tested that the brotherhood is restored, he can go back and he can go back and he could reveal his identity. Now I'm going to show you something cute. I don't know if this is the intention, but it's a nice idea. I'm going to share it, and then we go back to the big picture here. So if you look at, let me see if I can share it. Okay, let's find it. So this is a few parshas. It's last week's it's 2 parshas ago. I still want to try to find it. Give me just a moment. I will try to find it because it's nice to see it inside. Okay, Jill, I'm not sure I don't think I said this in the past, so I'm going to give you something new. Again, adding a detail. So this is the story of the kidnap. This is the story where everything goes bad. The brothers, chapter 37, his brothers went to pasture their father's flocks in Shechem. By the way, again, this story highlights a favoritism. 10 brothers go to work. One brother, Joseph, is staying home with dad. He doesn't have to work, right? That just, again, highlighting the favoritism to Joseph again and again. Israel said to Joseph, verse 13, Israel, which is another name for Jacob. Israel says to Joseph, are your brothers not pasturing in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am, prepared to go. Okay, verse 14 is the key. He said to him, go now and see to your brother's welfare and the welfare of the flocks, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Okay, one way to read verse 14. The father starts sensing that there's some peace, there's some tension between the brothers and Joseph. So he sends him, and he says, go now, verse 14, he said to him, go now and see to your brother's welfare and the welfare of the flocks. Okay, but how do you what is the Hebrew word? Go now and see the peace of your brothers. Literally, here they translate welfare, but shalom is peace. Go see the peace of your brothers. Go make sure, this could be read as, go make peace with your brothers. And then he says, and the welfare of the flock, and bring me back word. Go. It could be read, go find out their welfare and come back and tell me how they're doing. That's a simple meaning. But there's another meaning which says, go and make peace with your brothers and come back and tell me that you made peace. If that's the reading, okay, Joseph was sent on a mission. Was he successful on that day? Of course not. That's the day he didn't make peace with his brothers. That's the day that they kidnapped him. How long did it take for him to make peace with his brothers? It took 22 years. 22 years later, he could send back for the father and said, yes, I fulfilled the mission. I made peace with your brothers. He cannot bring back word to his father before he makes the peace with his brothers. So it's not the simple meaning. It's not the simple reading of the verse, but it's the poetic reading of the verse. In other words, that could mean the meaning of the verse. He says, I can't go back to my father without, what am I going to tell my father? That what? That you raised such a beautiful family with 10 brothers sell another brother as a slave, right? That would devastate him. It's not coming back with the peace of the family. So now he says, Father said, go see the peace of your brothers and bring you back news. Tell me when you made peace. So I'll tell you when I made peace. It may take 22 years, but I'm going to make peace. But I'm going to tell you when I made peace. Okay, so that's for that. And that's just to add a little spice for Jill's point. Okay, now we want to get to another, again, there's so many, you could look at the specifics and you can look at the big picture. I'm still trying to look at the big picture before we get to the specifics. So, big picture. You may have heard, okay, this is provocative. I shouldn't be saying this because I'm going to make people uncomfortable, but I'll say it anyway, right? Sunday, it's a beautiful day, 60 degrees. Hopefully you can tolerate a little excitement here. Okay, so you may have heard that Joseph is the example of someone who forgives his brothers. And people write about this. I know Rabbi Sachs wrote that Joseph is the first one in the Torah who forgave. And I had a good friend named Alex who used to live in Greenwich, and he was very offended by that. And he wrote Rabbi Sachs emails, and he said, no, it wasn't Joseph. He's not the first person in the Bible who forgave. Alex thought the first person in the Bible who forgave was Esav, who forgave his brother Jacob for stealing the blessings. But that's a whole other dispute. Is Joseph the first who forgave, or the second who forgave? I want to be a little provocative, and I would say, I don't know that Joseph forgave his brothers in the conventional sense of the word forgive. So it's very hard for me to talk about this because I'm not sure what forgives mean. I'm not sure what forgive means and what people think when they say forgive. But let's think about this for a second. Can you find me a verse in the Torah that it says that Joseph forgave his brothers? The answer is no. I mean, you could see his actions. He tells them, don't be upset that you sold me as a slave. He doesn't punish them. He supports them. He shows love to them. He's emotional. He's crying. All wonderful things. Does it say that he forgave? The answer is no. It doesn't say he forgave. Why doesn't it say he forgave? So one theory is, or one possible theory is, you can't forgive unless somebody asks for forgiveness. If you comb through the story, the brothers never asked for forgiveness. They don't ask for forgiveness. Why not? We'll get to why not in a minute. Not only they don't ask for forgiveness, but at the end of the story, I'm going to pull it up for you so you don't have to trust me. I don't want to sit here and just preach. You have to see it for yourself. At the end of the story, okay, give me just a second, I'll find it so I don't mislead you in any way. At the end of the story, which is next week we read how Jacob passes away. Now, as soon as Jacob passes away, they have a funeral. A long funeral takes a long time because in Egypt, they were big into funerals and burials. It was a big deal in Egypt. So there's 70-day mourning period. Then they go to Israel. It's a whole story. They come back to Egypt. The brothers are frightened. Why are the brothers frightened? They're frightened because they think that Joseph is going to take revenge. Joseph is going to punish them. But Joseph has been so nice for the last 17 years. Yeah, he's been nice because his father was around. But they don't really believe that Joseph forgave him. They thought that the reason why Joseph was so kind to them and didn't punish them was because their father was alive. He didn't want to upset his father. So now, after Jacob dies, they send a message to Joseph, and basically they make up a story. All commentators, virtually all commentators, I think all commentators, almost all commentators certainly believe that this is made up. This is a lie. This never happened. So let's read the verses. So this is the end of next week's parsha, toward the end of next week's parsha. I'm reading verse 15. Now Joseph's brothers saw that their father had died, and they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and return to us all the evil that we did to him. 17 years he's been supporting them. But they think that that was just because of their father was alive. So they commanded messengers to go to Joseph to say, your father commanded us before his death, saying, okay, remember, verse 17 is made up. It never happens. Okay, so they say, your father commanded us to tell you. So shall you say to Joseph, please forgive now your brother's transgression and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your fathers. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Okay, so what happens now? What happens now is only after the father's death do they say, your father asked that you forgive us. They don't even say, please forgive us. In other words, they make up a story. Somebody else asked that you, Joseph, forgive us, the brothers. They never say, please forgive us. So I don't know that Joseph forgave. It doesn't say that he forgave. I don't know that they asked for forgiveness. The second half of the verse maybe implies forgiveness, but the main point in 17 is they say, Dad asked that you forgive us. What about you? And now, by the way, he never said it. How do I know he never said it? Many of the commentators say he never said it because the father never believed that Joseph would hold a grudge. That the father held Joseph in higher esteem than the brothers held him. The brothers could not. Oh, so that's my point. Why didn't the brothers ask for forgiveness? Possibly because the brothers didn't think forgiveness is possible for such a terrible crime of selling your brother. So the brothers don't forgive Joseph. Don't ask for forgiveness. Maybe because they don't think forgiveness is possible. Joseph doesn't forgive because they don't ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness only works if the person asks for forgiveness. That's another story I don't want to get into right now. So if Joseph doesn't forgive, what does Joseph do? Oh, now that's the problem. Now that's the problem. Now that's the interesting thing. So typically so that's the interesting question. What did Joseph do? So what is Joseph doing if he didn't forgive? So now we want to look at this week's parsha. Finally, after jumping around all around the Torah, we're going to hopefully get to this week's parsha.
Question.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. Isn't there a part that says Joseph said to his brothers, don't feel bad what you did to me. You didn't do it. God made that happen to send me here to Egypt so I can continue saving you in the future, something to that effect.
Yes, so that was the verse I was looking for. We're waiting for a fire, try to find the pass. That's the verse I'm looking for. I'm going to put it on the screen in a minute. As soon as the fire trucks pass, I'll put it on the screen. But you have good memory. You remember the verse. But you're proving my point. It doesn't say, I forgive you. It says a lot of other wonderful things, but it doesn't say, I forgive you. Okay, I'm going to put out the cards here and tell you, I don't like forgiveness. In other words, I have to be transparent of my agenda here. There's this notion that somebody harms me and I forgive. I don't know that that's a Jewish notion. I don't know that it is. I think forgiveness means that a critical aspect of forgiveness is the person has to ask for forgiveness. If somebody harms you and does not ask for forgiveness, should you forgive? I don't know. Maybe some cases yes, maybe some cases no. I'm just being transparent. I believe that in some cases it's actually healthy not to forgive. I know this sounds unusual because most people will tell you, what you hear, all the bumper stickers is if you harbor animosity towards somebody else, if you don't forgive, you're letting them live in your head for free. I'm not sure that's 100% true. At least that's my perspective. So I'm giving an interpretation here, not my interpretation. I'm going to quote the names of the people who say this, but I'm saying my agenda. My agenda is I don't always think that forgiveness, if the other person does not ask for forgiveness, is the Jewish way. I don't know that it is. I'm not saying it's not. I don't know. Sometimes you hear the story. There was a crime committed, and then the family says somebody was killed, and the family says, "Oh, we forgive the perpetrator." Is that a good thing? I don't know. I'm not sure it's a good thing. So we'll open up the floor for discussion about what everybody thinks in a minute or two. But I'm not sure if forgiveness always works. I don't know that it works if the other person does not ask for forgiveness. Okay, so back to the point. So what does Joseph do if he doesn't forgive? I'm not saying he doesn't forgive. I'm saying I don't know that he forgave. Doesn't say that anywhere. Doesn't say it. I'm sorry, doesn't say it.
Wait, when you're saying you don't know if it works, you're saying whether the person is released from the action or whether the person who had the bad thing done is now feeling better. Because I think the second can happen without the first.
I don't know what forgiveness means. In other words, if forgiveness means that it's as if this thing never happened, then forgiveness can only work if the person who did the crime asks for forgiveness. In other words, if forgiveness is restoring the relationship, let's say we're in a relationship and I harm you, I offend you, and you say, you know what, I forgive you. I don't know what forgiveness means. If forgiveness means the restoration of the relationship is not restored. You forgive me, that's wonderful. Or you can ignore the cause I hurt you, that's wonderful. But that's just putting your head in the sand. Has the relationship been restored? Have I been corrected? Have I returned to the state we were when we were both in a loving relationship? No. So if forgiveness means restoring the relationship, going back to the state that we were before the sin, then the requirement that the person who sinned asks forgiveness is not a technicality. It's critical to what forgiveness is. Again, by this definition of forgiveness, that's the problem of talking about forgiveness, is that for everybody it means something else. So again, enough of my commentary. We'll get back and want to hear what everybody has to say about this, but I want to first read the verses and then read one Kabbalistic interpretation of Rabbeinu Bachai. And again, it's interesting because it's unusual, it's provocative. It's not the typical way, the way we read the story. It's not the typical way, the way we think about forgiveness. So it's interesting because if I just tell you the typical, then Jill is going to say she knows it already. That's hard. So I have to come up with something that is unusual.
Only if you said it, Rabbi.
Jill, you know I'm kidding, right? I'm just giving you a hard time this morning. I'm sorry. I apologize. I hope you forgive me. I'm asking for forgiveness.
It's too late.
It's too late.
Rabbi, I have a question for you. Doesn't the Torah command us to not hold a grudge against another Jew?
Yes, if a person, not ask a grudge. Okay, we'll talk about what a grudge means. Hang on to that question. If I try to avoid it, come back to me and make sure I answer that question. Okay. Let's read the verses. Let's read what Joseph says and what he doesn't say. It's all there. You don't have to hear it from me. It's on the screen. So finally, Judah gives his wonderful speech. If we have time, we'll get back to it. I don't know if we'll have time today. Maybe we have to come back next year. Okay, here is the verse. Verse 3. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? By the way, question. Did this statement cause relief or did it cause anguish? Put yourself in the shoes of the brothers. This is absolutely fascinating. In other words, fascinating to contemplate. On one hand, they have this terrible problem. What's the terrible problem? Here they have to go back to their father without Benjamin because Benjamin was taken away. The father's going to die. He's going to have a heart attack on the spot. So Judah is trying to plead with the leader, please take me instead of Benjamin. That's a big crisis on their hands. What are we going to do about the fact that Benjamin was framed? Now, the moment the guy says, I am Joseph, that problem is solved. Okay, so it's Joseph. It's just been a game. You're not going to take Benjamin. We're going to go back to our father. That problem is solved. But the problem is now we have a bigger problem. How are the brothers going to face the brother who they just sold out into slavery? So now, in some sense, one problem was solved, but now there's a bigger problem. So instead of rejoicing that now Benjamin has been saved and Judah doesn't have to be a slave, now they're in shock. They go into a shock. Verse 3, but his brothers could not answer him because they were startled by his presence. Okay, we're very happy now Benjamin is safe, but now we have a bigger problem. So now let's think what Joseph says. Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. And they drew closer. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. It's funny. He says you sold in Egypt. In the moment he's going to say you didn't sell me into Egypt. But he says, I'm the Joseph, your brother, who you sold into Egypt. Verse 4. But now do not be sad, and do not let it not trouble you. Yichar is more than trouble. Yichar means wrath. Don't be angry that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. Why? For already 2 years of the famine have passed in the midst of the land, and for another 5 years there will be neither plowing nor harvest. Verse 7, and God sent me before you to make you a remnant in the land, and to preserve it for you for a great deliverance. I'm going to go to the next reading 3. And then he says, and now you did not send me here. A moment ago he says you did, but that's another story. You did not send me here, but God. And he made me a father to Pharaoh, means a leader to Pharaoh, a lord over all his household, and a ruler over the entire land of Egypt. That's basically the heart of the speech. He says, go back, bring my father, verse 11, and I will sustain you here, etc. And they're crying and everybody's reunited, wonderful and happily ever after to some degree. Okay, so let's go back. So now this is what Richard said. Richard said, look, Joseph is saying, don't be upset, don't be angry, because you didn't send me here. God sent me here for a purpose. Okay, so what does that really mean? What does that mean? It means that Joseph, if you just look at the action of the brothers in isolation, there's no forgiveness. There's nothing wrong, and they should be upset. They should be upset. But what happens if you broaden the lens? If you broaden the lens of the story, and you say, of course there was an evil crime committed against me, but I don't choose to look at it. I don't choose to ignore it. It's not forgiveness and I forget, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not ignoring it. In the beginning, he does say, you sent me to Egypt, you sold me to Egypt. He's not ignoring and not forgetting, but he's broadening the lens. He says, okay, what else is going on? What else is going on is that this is part of a greater story. And this is part of the divine plan. And obviously there was tremendous positivity for me, from being sold into a slave as a slave, because now I can save the family and save Egypt. Okay, so now let's analyze this. What is he telling them? He's telling them, don't repent. He's telling them, don't feel bad. He's telling them, you're not responsible. They are responsible. But that's not the part that he chooses to look at. So in other words, according to some of the early Kabbalists, Rabbeinu Bachaya is one particular person. He says he did not forgive them. He just said, look, there's more to the story. If there's more to the story, there's no anger here. Okay. So let's translate this in practical terms. Practical terms, somebody goes and offends me in any way, whatever he does, he offends me. If he comes back and says, Menachem, please forgive me, then I'm supposed to forgive him. Well, wonderful. We restore the relationship. I'm, of course, for that form of forgiveness. I'm pro forgiveness in the sense where the person asked for forgiveness and now the relationship is restored. Sign me up. I'm on board. What happens if the person does not forgive me, does not ask for forgiveness? Here I have a few choices. I think I can ignore it, which is fine. But what happens if it's too painful to ignore? It hurt me too deep. The person sold me into a slave. It's too hurtful. My own brother harmed me. It's too hurtful. I can't ignore it. What are you going to tell me? Try to go ignore it. I don't know that ignoring is. I don't know that ignoring and suppressing is always the solution. I don't think that it is. So what you have to do is what you have to do with what Joseph does. Joseph doesn't whitewash the crime. He doesn't say, "Oh, it wasn't you. It was the divine plan." He says that too, but he says, "You sold me here." But he says, "But there's a reason why I was sold here, in addition to your evil choice. And I choose to look at not only what you did, but at the full picture. And the full picture is, look at what I have become as a result of your negative act to me. And I've grown from this experience. And if I've grown from this experience, then this experience is not as painful and it's not as negative and it doesn't bring out the worst in me, because when I look at the situation, I look at the positivity. So in that sense, I'm not blocking out the negativity. I'm not blocking out the evil that the brothers did, but I choose to see it in a larger context. And if I choose to see it in a larger context, then it's not negative. And I'm not letting, like the saying goes, I'm not letting the other person live in my brain rent free, because thinking about the crime is not eating me up, because I'm thinking about it in a larger context, in the context of what the divine plan is. So what's the healthy way to think about? Somebody offended me. He did not ask for forgiveness. I cannot ignore it. If I could, I could, but if I can't ignore it, what am I supposed to do? What's the healthy way forward? So I think, at least according to this interpretation, the healthy way forward is to focus not on the crime per se, but I say, what do I learn from this experience? How am I going to grow as a person? What's the divine plan? Why did God make this happen to me? What could I grow? How can I grow and flourish as a result of this pain that was inflicted upon me? If you have that attitude, which I believe Joseph does, then forgiveness is not critical for your own health. Now, should you forgive? In other words, should you forgive? Well, if you can. I think the important part of forgiveness is the other person asking for forgiveness. That's how the relationship is restored. Otherwise, we're just putting our head in the sand. But even if the person does not ask for forgiveness, you could still live a healthy, balanced life without forgetting, without forgiving in the conventional sense of forgiveness. Now, what I said is right according to one opinion. There may be other opinions. So I'm putting it out here. If you like this interpretation, if you think this is helpful in your life, then accept it. If you don't like this interpretation, if you think it's not going to be helpful in your life, then reject it. Free country. It's not a theocracy here. Free country, everyone gets to make their own decisions of which interpretations they like of it all. Okay, that's the story in short on this issue on forgiveness. I think it's probably, if people want to ask a question, let's devote 3-4 minutes for questions, and then we want to continue to other themes.
I've got one, Rabbi.
Go ahead, Don.
I love that interpretation, but I've always seen this story less about forgiveness and more about repentance. I mean, we are called Yehudim because that in my opinion, Yehuda is the protagonist of this story, not Joseph. That when it came time to defend, he thought that this was just treats for all the sins they've done. But once Joseph started beating up on Benjamin, who is not complicit in that, he knew it was not an act of God, this retribution, but the act of a man. So he was willing to give up his life and in that situation. So I see this more as, I mean, it's known that Yehuda is the first person who ever repented in the Bible, and was the head of the Davidic dynasty. So to me, this is less about forgiveness and more about teshuvah. And Judah shows us how to do it. And, forgiveness is less of an issue here to me.
I fully agree with you, Bob. And that's the lesson from Judah's character.
Perspective. And to me, that is the story.
I'm not disagreeing. But like in any story or any film, there's the main character and there's a supporting character. And sometimes you could learn something from the supporting characters. And I think that in our life, we're both Judah and we're both Joseph. In other words, there is a place. I could talk for myself. As sometimes you get hurt from people, and the question is, so Judah is when I hurt someone else, how should I turn around? So the lesson of Judah is when I hurt somebody else, what should I do? Learn from Judah. But what about when I get hurt? And probably everybody on this planet is going to get hurt at some point, and maybe even from people close to you. Okay. So now the question is, what do I do when I am hurt? Here, Judah doesn't help me. So I'm not going to debate the fact of who's the main character. Is it Judah? Is it Joseph? I'm willing to give you that Judah is the main character. No problem, right? Because we're Jews. We want to know about Judah. We want to know how to transform. I made him, right? A lot of people. In other words, the message of the story is the transformation of Judah, clearly. No question about that. So I agree with you. On the other hand, there is a lesson to learn from Joseph, because when I get hurt, I don't think I'm going to get hurt as bad as Joseph, from the people as closest to me as my brothers. But at some point in my life, I've gotten hurt. Now the question is, how do I respond in a healthy way, in a Jewish way? So again, I'm not going to say the story is about Joseph, but I'm going to say he's at least a supporting actor. And
Totally agree.
I think you can get an award for being a supporting actor too, occasionally, I think.
100%.
There's a class, right? There's a category, supporting actor. Okay, good. So that's Joseph.
Rabbi,
I want to say a couple of words about the main character, because what you said here, the lesson is beautiful, because it gives you comfort to look at the whole story in a broader perspective. In this case, you can derive lesson for yourself, because there are two tracks there. There is a person who sinned and there is a person who needs to learn the lesson. And Joseph gives you two examples. So first of all, he learned himself, he became stronger, and only then he was able to kind of decide. And still he was still thinking about his brothers, because he wanted his brothers to get on a higher level. So that's the lesson that we are trying to learn. This is not easy. I mean, you can do it yourself, right? But when it comes to raise the person who sinned on a higher level, that we definitely can learn from Joseph, and we keep learning all our lives. And I don't know if that's even achievable.
So what Vicky is saying, and this is to Bob's point, of course, Judah has been transformed, but you have to ask yourself, who helps Judah along the way? Vicky says it's Joseph by setting up the scenario where they'll be tested again. I've said in the past that I think it's Tamar. I don't know if we'll have time to get into that, but Tamar 2 weeks ago is the person really who helps Judah transform. We can discuss that if we have time. It's entertaining because there's some very interesting similarities between both stories, Judah and Tamar and Judah and Joseph. And so I think, but again, so the question is Judah is transformed, but the question is who helps him along the way. And I think Vicky's point is that it's Joseph very concerned not only about how he's going to deal with the pain, but how can I help the person who harmed me? How can I help that person transform? So that's a very interesting point.
Not just Judah, but all brothers,
Yeah,
You're thinking about the whole family.
Rabbi, I was thinking of the nature of forgiveness. In this case, Joseph expanded the context and
Yes,
saw it as God's plan, and saw it in a larger context, and that's one way to deal with it. And he also gave himself permission not to feel hatred. I mean, because this was, on the other hand, I think of the Holocaust and the unforgivable things that were never to be, in quotes, forgiven. And yet forgiveness is good for us. So what does forgiveness confer that, what's the sort of middle point? And I thought the middle point is to disengage from the hatred of something that is unforgivable, to sort of in some way let it go. It wasn't the case here, but in the case of the Holocaust, where people so deliberately, you can't I couldn't forgive, but how do people who have experienced this get on with it? They have to do something similar to forgiveness to disengage from repeating the hatred or the insult or the problem.
so I can't really speak to this fully because it's beyond my expertise. I'm not a psychologist. Unfortunately, Beth is not here today. But you did say a word that I want to focus on. You said the word permission. And I think that some people in this culture, you need permission not to forgive. In other words, there's nothing wrong. If someone harms me, I could forgive if the person asks forgiveness. What happens if the person didn't ask forgiveness? Am I a bad person if I'm dwelling it in the negative way, if it's bringing out negativity within me, if it's causing negativity within me, it's making me hate, filling my heart with hate, of course that's negative. But what's a positive way? So the positive way is not necessarily letting go, but moving on, depending what moving on means. It doesn't mean to forgive. It doesn't mean to forget about it. Not always, sometimes you could and you should, but not always should you. And I don't think Joseph forgot about what his brothers did at any point in in his whole life. But you have to put it in a broader context. What does God want of me? So I remember I was 13 years old when I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington for the first time. And I don't think I have not been there. I'm embarrassed to say I have not been there since. But I was there at 12 years old, at 13 years old. And I don't remember really much from the entire experience. What I do remember, it's strange that I remember this. It's strange because after the entire museum at the time, on the way out, there's a little theater, and you can watch a small screen, and you can watch Survivors from Steven Spielberg's whatever the project is called. I forget what the project is called, where it's a library of memoirs from survivors. And I don't remember anything in the museum. And I don't remember any of those interviews except for one. There was a woman who says, she was elderly at the time, and she says, "Look, I raised my children to forgive, to love, never taught them hate. I only taught them love." But she said, "But I can't forgive." And that was the end. That was the end of the interview. And is it always good? So I connected that. In other words, that's an extreme case. But even in my life, I have somebody does something wrong against me at some point. I don't know that you have to give yourself permission to experience the pain, to not let go of the pain. I'm in pain. Accept that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not evil. Joseph didn't ignore the pain. He didn't move on from the pain. The pain was part of his story. It's part of what made him who he is. It's part of what motivated him to try to be successful. And try to motivate him to ask the question, what does God want of me? What's my purpose? What's my mission? So in that sense, accepting the pain and not seeking necessarily to ignore it or to run away from it, sometimes may be the more healthy approach. Not always, not all the time. Sometimes I could ignore. So again, I'm not saying that I know the answer to all the questions. I'm not saying that every person is the same, every situation is the same. But I'm saying, at least according to some commentators, Rabbeinu Bachai in particular, he says Joseph does not forgive. He doesn't forgive it because he wasn't asked to forgive. What does he do? He's not dwelling in the anger and hate. That he does walk away from. There's no hate. There's no anger, but there is pain. And there's a recognition that I'm entitled to experience the pain, and I'm not forced to drop the pain for the sake of forgiveness. So that's how I look at this. Now, Neil asks a question. He says, the Torah says you can't hold a grudge. And that's a very good question because it almost throws off my entire thesis. And then I'm going to be out of a job. There's a joke here. The joke is coming. Once upon a time, so there's a custom to eat 3 meals on Shabbos. The evening, Friday night, Shabbos day, and Shabbos afternoon. They call it Shalosh Sudot, a third meal. Problem is, by the third meal, especially in a winter week, nobody has any energy to eat the third meal. If you ate cholent on Shabbos at 1 p.m., and then the third meal you have to eat at 4 p.m., you're stuffed. How could you eat a fourth meal? So some people have a custom, well, you don't have to eat a meal, you can eat some fruit. Other people say, you know what? You don't need a meal. What you could do is you could say a word of Torah. And Torah is so nourishing, it's like food. That's the law. Now I'm going to give you a joke. So the joke is that somebody says, no, I'm very strict. He says, me? Because I never fulfill my obligation of eating the third meal by saying a word of Torah. Never. I always make sure to eat something, maybe a piece of herring, maybe sushi. This is why. So I'll tell you why. Let's say I fulfill my obligation. Okay, this is a Talmudic joke, but you got to bear with me. Let's say I fulfill my obligation to eat the third meal by saying a word of Torah. Wonderful. I fulfilled my obligation. I'm happy. Problem is, Sunday morning, I'll come to the synagogue, and my friend is going to disprove my Torah, disprove my theory, disprove my thesis. And then retroactively, it turns out that I never ate a third meal. Because when I eat my piece of fish, nobody could take that away from me. So the point is that Neil almost threatens to undermine my entire thesis. So I don't know the answer, but I think the answer is you have to ask yourself, what does the Torah say when the Torah says don't hold a grudge? So look at Rashi and look at the Rambam, and they all say the same thing. This is an example of a grudge. A grudge is as follows. I come to you and I say, Neil, can I borrow your hammer? And you say no. Tomorrow, you come back to me and you say, Menachem, can I borrow your screwdriver? Torah says, don't hold a grudge. Give him the screwdriver. The Torah says, don't hold a grudge. And there's another term, don't take revenge. Don't take revenge means not giving the screwdriver. Don't hold a grudge means don't tell him, Neil, I'm giving you a screwdriver, even though yesterday you didn't give me a hammer. In other words, don't say it, don't bring it up. So in that sense, it's more of a practical, technical thing. But does that mean that if somebody really harms me, now we're talking about a hammer or a screwdriver, someone really harms me, I am forced, I have to ignore the pain and not remember what happened? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean do I have to put it into his face? Maybe yes, maybe no. So I think that you can differentiate between the cases. I think I may be wrong.
One more point, Rabbi. You know, it's easy for us to read this story and see it's good to be king. I mean, here's Joseph, whether he forgives or not forgives, he's the master. I mean, the interesting way of looking at this, what if he were still in jail? Would he have been so magnanimous? That's the issue. I mean, you can't argue with success, and here's Joseph in the seat of success. If he were still, you know, proverbially sucking wind down in the jails, would he have been so magnanimous?
The answer is I don't know, but I'll tell you something about Joseph. The reason why Joseph is in the 5 books of Moses, the only time the Torah says about a person, the person was a successful person, was Joseph. The only successful person in the Torah in the 5 books of Moses is Joseph. In what context does it say that Joseph is successful? Not when he becomes the leader of Egypt, no. It says that he's successful when he's sold as a slave and he rises to the top of his master's household. And then when he's put in prison, let me just make sure what I'm saying is correct. Okay, 2 times the Torah say Joseph is successful. You ready? This is the Torah's definition of success. He's sold as a slave. Oh, but he's very successful. Why? He rises in his master's home. He becomes the leader of the home. Then it gets worse. Then he's put into prison. Don't worry, he's successful. How is he successful? Because he's in charge of the prison. So this is the Torah's definition of success. The only guy they say is successful is Joseph when he's a slave, when he's in prison. By the way, when he's the master of Egypt, it doesn't say he's successful. So what is the Torah telling us? A successful person doesn't depend on your circumstances. It doesn't depend on external forces. Successful is internal. No matter what the conditions are, you make the best of that circumstance. If you're sold as a slave, you become the master of your master's home. If you're put in prison, you become the part on top of the prison. Success as circumstances outside of me don't dictate success. Success it's a state of of my own mind frame. Okay, point 1. Point 2, why does he rise? Why is he so successful? Why is it that wherever he is, everybody lets him be in charge? Because he has a positive attitude. How do I know he has a positive attitude? Because one day he wakes up and he says the Pharaoh's two ministers, fellow prisoners, are sad. He says, why are you sad this morning? Why are we sad? We're in prison. Isn't that a good reason? No, Joseph is a positive person. He can't tolerate negativity. And because he's a positive person, therefore he rises to success. Again, the definition of success is wherever you are, you're going to rise to the top, regardless of the external circumstances. So I think, would he be as forgiving? I don't know. But did Joseph believe all along? Was he optimistic? Did he believe that his dreams will become fulfilled? I think yes. I think if not, he would fall into a depression. So would he be able to forgive them before he sees the good? I don't know. That's a good point. But was he the example of a positive person, even in the face of terrible circumstances? I think the answer is yes. Now, because it's 11 o'clock, I spent too much time on forgiveness. I ask your forgiveness, this only talking about forgiveness. But one more point I want to say, maybe take 60 seconds or a little bit more, and this will come full circle to what Bob is saying. So what's happening with this story is Joseph is not a taking revenge, even when he is giving his brother, tormenting his brothers. How do I see that? Because nobody in the Torah cries as much as Joseph. So Esav cries a little bit, and Joseph cries like many, many times. Every time he accuses his brother of something, he goes to the other room and he cries. So he's overtaken by emotion, not hate. When people hate, by the way, when people hate, they don't cry. Hate is anger. When people are angry, they don't cry. Crying is a sensitive feeling. Anger is not. But in any case, then he cries over Benjamin. Once he reveals the identity, he cries to his brothers. He cries over Benjamin. Benjamin cries over his heart. Finally, he meets his father, and he's crying once more. So everybody's crying. It's a wonderful story. Everybody's crying. Okay. Except for one person. We just have to find it. Okay, this is, I'm not going to put it on the screen, it'll take too long. Chapter 46, verse 29. Joseph harnessed his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, to Goshen. He appeared before him, fell on his neck, and he wept on his neck excessively. Now, in the other stories, it says Joseph cried on Benjamin, and Benjamin cried on Joseph. Here, Joseph fell on his neck, on his father's neck, and wept on his neck excessively. So what does Rashi say? Where's Jacob in the picture? Jacob is completely passive. So Rashi quotes the Talmud, the Medrash, and he says, Jacob wasn't crying. Joseph was crying on Jacob, Jacob wasn't crying. You know why he wasn't crying? He was busy. What was he busy doing? He hasn't seen his son in 22 years. They finally meet. Sorry, I'm busy, I can't cry. What was he doing? So the rabbis say he was reading the Shema. Must have been the morning. He was davening. He was reading the Shema. Now davening takes an hour, but in those days, reading the Shema is one paragraph. So I asked you a question. Jacob is going to meet Joseph. He couldn't daven 5 minutes before. He couldn't pray 5 minutes early, 5 minutes later. He has to say the Shema specifically when he's meeting Joseph at that moment. What is going on here? Okay. So one interpretation is that okay, so there's all kinds of interpretations. I'm going to say the one that I think relates to what Bob said. What is the message of Shema? What does Shema mean? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Oneness of God. What does it mean, the oneness of God? It means many things. Of course, one overarching message, but it expresses itself. The oneness of God expresses itself in many different ways. One way the oneness of God expresses itself is that God is present both when it's difficult, when there's trouble, when there's difficulties. I believe God is one. God is everywhere. God is everywhere means even in the challenging times. Of course, God is there also when things are good, when I sense God's presence. But if God is everywhere, then God is with me in the dark times as well. Unlike other faiths, which say that when things are going your way, it's because God is with you. And when you're being punished, it's because God fell asleep or because of Satan or whatever. We believe Hashem Echad, God is one. So everything that happens in the world is controlled by God. So God is present both in the good times and in the bad times. Now, I'm not sure that we always sense it that way. We don't always feel it that way. But that's the belief. The belief is God is always with us. That's the meaning of God is one. He's one. He's always with us. He's present both in the negativity and in the positivity. Okay. So now Bob says, what happens? Going back to Bob's point, where does Joseph see the good? When does he become so positive? When things go good or when things are bad? The Talmud's meaning may be that Jacob saying the Shema at the precise moment of meeting Joseph, which is really the bridge of the past 22 years when he was in pain and spiritual darkness. And now when the tide is going to turn to good, he's reminding himself that it's the one God that was with him and in present, both in the challenging times and in the positive times. In other words, both in Jacob's absence and now in the reunion. It's all one whole. And they were lucky enough because they could see the full cycle. They could see how the difficulty led to Joseph's rise to power. We, many times, are not as lucky. We don't necessarily see how the challenge leads to the success. And sometimes it's completely concealed. And sometimes we have to believe it. Maybe we have to believe it. But that's the faith of Shema. God is with me, not only in the good times, but in the challenging times. And to make that point, Jacob is going to say, Hashem Echad, God is one. Both in the pain and in the joy, it's the same oneness of God. It's the same presence of God. Now, Jacob felt it. If Joseph felt it, then he would have some of that forgiveness, some of that positive attitude during the difficult times as well. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. Unfortunately, we were only able to address a very little sliver of the parsha, but I appreciate our discussion and that you joined us, and everybody should have a wonderful day, and we should see each other in good health in the future, in the near future.
Thank you.